Welcome to Healing Echoes. Today we have with us Jack Gregory, aka the Accidental Journalist. He is a UK-based author, consultant, and actor. Overcoming a history of sexual trafficking, rejection, fear, mental illness, and addiction, he transformed his life after getting clean in 2014. Following a near-death experience in 2015, Jack found a new purpose. It found a new purpose in sobriety. He's now a Hollywood consultant, actor, poet, journalist, author, award-winning filmmaker, and podcaster. Jack shares his story to educate and inspire, consulting for the NHS and speaking in various settings, including churches, schools, and colleges. He has authored 3 books, including one on survivors of human trafficking. Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
All right, awesome. I am so glad to have you with us today. I know when we spoke previously, one of the things that stood out to me the most, I think we haven't had anyone speak on it yet, is the sexual trafficking. And so I kind of just wanted you to kind of start there, talking about its impact on you, kind of how you overcame it.
Of
Um,
course.
of course, share as much as you're comfortable with sharing or as little as you're comfortable with.
Yeah. So I guess I'll go into a little bit before,
Mhm.
and then give you a little bit of background on it. So I grew up in a small mining town, um, in a county called Yorkshire, which is in the north of England.
Mhm.
Um, and it was a mining town surrounded by 5 other mining towns. It was also a market town. So in the 1980s, when um, our Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, in her wisdom, she decided to shut down the mines because it was cheaper to buy coal from abroad than it was to mine it
Mm.
um, in our own country. So a lot of the miners, they lost their jobs, they were made redundant, and all they walked away with was a carriage clock.
Wow.
Um, so it was a once thriving town that began to dwindle.
Mhm.
I grew up in a loving family. My dad was a railwayman, um, a civil engineer, and my mum was a social worker.
Mhm.
So I was brought up in the more affluent part of the town.
Mhm.
Um, but I found out on my 8th birthday, I was told that I was adopted.
Oh, wow.
Um, they didn't want to, but they had to by law.
Mhm.
Um, it must have been terrible for my mum,
Yeah.
but I just remember being sat on her knee and her telling me that we love you very much, but you have a real mum out there, uh, and you know I'll always be a mum, but you have a biological family out there.
Right.
And for a lot of people, I guess it would have been affirmation on, at least they have a family to love. But for me and my divergent mind,
Mhm.
it was a rejection.
Yeah.
It was a loss. So I fell into a different way of thinking, and that's when it started to get dark for me.
Mhm.
I had learning difficulties. I had dyslexia, and dyscalculia,
Mhm.
also neurodivergent. I now know to be, or believe to be, autistic.
Mhm.
But back then in the 1980s, it wasn't known at all.
Yeah.
And because I couldn't read or write properly, and because I didn't know a lot, I didn't take much in.
Right.
I was put into the special school system. I managed to do 4 years of grammar school and 1 year of high school before I was sent into the special school system. But I did that by masking. I
Mhm.
did that by being naughty at school,
Yeah.
uh, lazy. It takes time to get through the system, so I managed to do that. Um, So by the time they found out, they put me into the special school system. Now, the thing about the British special school system back in the 1980s, well, what can we say? It wasn't easy, and it was a breeding ground for certain types of adults, predators. I was sent to a special school in the middle of a town, a couple of towns away. But it was a mile to any part of the, any main town centre in any direction. It was all fields around.
Wow.
I excelled in being naughty because they rewarded bad behaviour with really good things like caving, climbing, canoeing, kayaking, going away on the army youth team, really fun things. I was really good at cross country. I could do the 1500 meters in about 7.5 minutes.
Nice.
Which is no record breaking time, but when you're running, as you can see, I have an affinity for VHS.
Yeah.
This was back in the big days of VHS when we would pirate films, and I would run them around the town and make some money from it. When CDs first came out, as when you could, it was really hard to burn them. So could do it. I was making a lot of money, but I could go do that in a lunchtime and still be back for pudding.
Yeah.
So, but when I was told I was adopted, something broke, and I got this identity crisis at 8.
Yeah.
So at 8, imagine being 8 years old and having an existential crisis.
Yeah, I was just gonna say what an age to hear that at.
Yeah. So I didn't know who I was, so I started creating these sort of different people that I would be to lots of different people, and I could be what I thought. If I couldn't be who I thought I was, I could be who I want to be. I began to lie a lot.
Yeah.
About little things, about big things, and people just came to know me as a bit of a liar. They used to call me Cloud9 Cuckoo Land because that's where I kind of lived in my own imagination. I always had a head for words. I was always good with words, but I could never get them down on paper.
Yeah.
So I was good at play acting, and I would go to drama classes on a weekend and after school and stuff, and I really enjoyed it, but because it helped me create someone that I wanted to be. But because there were certain adults within that system that saw a way in,
Yeah.
they took advantage, and it came to the point where I was being told, well, you can tell who you like because they will never understand you. They will never believe you. So, we're going to do it anyway.
Right.
And you might as well get paid for it. I was getting cigarettes and
Right.
kind of money and whatever.
Yeah.
And I always saw it as, I guess, if it was happening to me, it wasn't happening to someone else.
Right.
So I was being passed around with certain people. A lot of these people are dead now.
Right.
So I won't speak ill of their families, but it went on for years, even after I left school,
Mm,
because I was troubled at school. I was really, really troubled at school, and
right.
people, um, and um, when I left, I liked to drink and I liked to take drugs.
Mm,
Uh, so I found myself in 12-step meetings, certain anonymous meetings,
mhm.
um, and there were people there that were involved with some of the adults within the school system,
Ah,
and I was being passed around. Now I didn't know that was trafficking until 2016, and I spent 6 months working with escapees of trafficking, documenting their stories for my book.
mhm.
Um, and I'm listening to them, and I'm thinking, that's me,
Right.
that's me, that's me,
Yeah.
that's me.
Starting to connect the dots.
It,
Yeah.
um, because I wouldn't have even. I just thought it was abuse being passed around. It was abuse, but
Yeah.
it was basically a child trafficking ring, and I dealt with it.
Yeah.
Dealt with it. I left home at 17, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, Ended up in several different sort of houses, and then got my own flat. Um, yes, in about 1995, 1996.
Mhm.
And then that's when the drug usage sort of really got really, really bad.
Right.
There was still the flat was in the same town as I went to school in, and there was still some of the uh, people involved
Right.
that hung around, and I was still in and out of 12-step meetings because I was being told I was sick, I was ill, I needed to do this, needed to do this. Um,
Right.
they call it 13 stepping when someone does that to you,
Mm.
um, and they're using you for their own sexual means.
Mhm.
But yeah, and it continued until I left Yorkshire, I guess, in 1999,
Right.
and I buried it for years.
Yeah.
I wouldn't talk about it, and it's only recently that I've begun talking about it because I've started to deal with my trauma.
Mm. Yeah, I was gonna ask how you got into the kind of the healing process for that specifically, how breaking the silence has been for you.
Um, yeah, it's been quite cathartic. In 2012, I had a little photography studio above a shop.
Hmm.
I started making short films with a friend, and they were called Asylum, and it was just uh, improvised. It was an improvised hot seat session, basically.
Mm.
We would sit on a sofa, it would be filmed. We would imagine the worst, and then we were told we were in an asylum. Everything was, mental health and stuff like that was all illegal.
Hmm.
Go. And I started making those films. I've made them until recently. Um, I've had a few festival selections because of my last one.
Hmm.
But I masked my story in fiction, and I would create these fictitious characters, but I would let some of my story
Mm.
through. Um,
Out through them, yeah.
I found myself in 2014. I had a massive uh, psychological breakdown. My marriage had ended a few years before.
Hmm.
I tried to punch my way through my ex-wife's oak door to get to my daughter.
Hmm.
I was having a complete and utter
Yeah.
breakdown, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd met a very kind lady at the food bank. I was homeless,
Mm-hmm.
uh, for surfing and part-time on the streets and things. And I'd be going to a food bank coffee morning on a Friday morning. And I guess in the end of February, March time, I met a lady there. She was serving coffee.
Mm-hmm.
She liked my Doctor Who t-shirt. Got talking. She'd not long had a baby, and her husband had left her.
Mm.
And she served me coffee with a smile, and she took me for a sandwich, and despite being told not to. And then I didn't see her for quite a while,
Mm-hmm.
and then we got together, I guess, in the September, October.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But after I met her, I decided that I wanted to get better. I
Yeah.
really liked her. I wanted to get better. I was on crack cocaine. Now I was on anything that I could take. I would have taken vitamins if it would have got me out of my own mind. But
Mm.
I had a high tolerance for methamphetamine. And I'd been to my uncle's funeral, and I came back, and everything just gone crap. And I
Yeah.
found myself. I'd had a bit of money, and I found myself in a crack house, 10 o'clock at night, 26th of June 2014.
Mm.
And I was sat in the crack house, and I said, God, I can't do this. I can't do this anymore. So either take my life or take away this hunger, this thirst for drugs.
Mm.
And I took an almighty hit of methamphetamine, and then I passed out, which is highly unusual on crack.
Yeah.
And I woke up at 4 minutes past 12 on the 27th of June 2014, and I haven't used a day since.
Wow.
My um, my want was just taken away,
Yeah.
and days of sobriety turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and next coming June it's 10 years.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so I knew that I couldn't live the life that I'd been living, but I knew that if I needed to maintain some sort of life and some sort of sobriety, I needed to get relatively honest with myself, and I
Mm-hmm.
needed to start working on some of my traumas.
Mm.
Um, I was I'd started planning the Between the Streetlights book,
Mm-hmm.
which would be my second book, because in 2015, February, March 2015, I got really, really ill,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended up in hospital dying for 4 minutes.
Wow.
Um, I spent what felt like months in hell,
Mm.
and that was a lonely place.
Yeah, I can imagine.
When I was brought back, I had a massive psychological breakdown and became convinced that I'd caused the apocalypse,
Oh, wow.
and that people had been replaced with clones and robots or whatever, or had been used as puppets and
Mm-hmm.
punished by God. And I would be punished until the end of eternity. It was a
Mm.
dark, dark time. I wouldn't eat.
Yeah.
I was 6 stone 6 ounces.
Wow.
Which is, I don't know what that is in pounds. I guess under 80,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm 6'1".
Yeah.
I
So
was so,
withering away.
I was. Um, People from my local church would come in and see me.
Mm-hmm.
They would get screamed at. I didn't know what I was doing.
Oh.
Our lead elder came and to pray for my soul, because they were told that they were going to lose me again.
Mm.
And it was a rough few weeks. It was like 3 or 4 weeks that I was having this delusion. They were feeding me when I was asleep. They were putting things down my throat, and you know, when I was passing out,
Yeah.
just to keep me alive, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I would keep ripping the feeding tube out.
Mm-hmm.
But I was battling with my own past in my head,
Mm.
my guilt and shame and everything that had gone on. I saw everything, all the abuse over and over and over and over. And then I met Christ at the end of my bed.
Mm.
And, you know, I said, what do I need to do? He says, you know what you need to do. So I said, okay, you know, Jesus, I take you into my life. But
Yeah.
finally, you know, so I'd always wanted to not say that and skirt on church, because I wanted the option to still be a bit naughty if I wanted to be. But
Mm-hmm. You didn't want to commit fully.
exactly, yeah. And I said I accept you into my life. And I'd been like the way that I saw was very dark, and it was like looking at a really old film on an old CRT television,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
uh, not a very good picture, quite dark, and it went from that back into HD. You know, I would see back in full color. They'd given me this anti infection drug. I had tuberculosis because of the way that I'd lived.
Mm.
Uh, I had double pneumonia, type 2 lung failure, pleurisy, and
Wow.
something that hadn't been seen for about 30 years.
Yeah.
Um, but this anti infection drug, it it gave me a rash from here to my torso, and it was
Oh.
literally like I'd been burned. It felt like I'd been burned.
Oof.
You've never seen anything like it. It was all swollen and red and blotchy. Uh,
Ouch.
it itched and it burned, and it was awful. I thought they'd put acid on a bed cover and then put
Right.
it on how much it burned.
Wow.
And the nurse came in and she saw me sitting up, and you know, somebody under 80 pounds sat up in bed looking like a skeleton with skin.
Mm.
Hadn't really spoken in quite a long time, and if
Mm.
I did, I was screaming at people.
Right.
I said to the nurse, her name is Jackie, she's a very good friend of mine now. I said, would you mind awfully getting me some water so I can have a wash, please? And she went white, bless her. The doctors came running in. They thought I was going to die. They were preparing for me to die. They were preparing my family for me to die.
Right.
Um, and they came in, and I was sat up, and I was talking. Um, and they brought me in a bowl with a sponge.
Right.
And no word of a lie, I started to have this bed wash, and I started washing here.
Yeah.
This rash just started to peel away underneath
Oof.
the sponge. And,
Yeah.
and as I finished, it was all gone.
Wow.
It was all gone. I was, you know, there was not a blemish
Yeah.
body apart from the tattoos that I have.
Yeah. It's like
And
wash clean in more than one way.
yes, and it was a miracle. And then I did have a job before I went in, but
Mm-hmm.
I lost it because I was made redundant while I was in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a few £100 of redundancy money, and wages that I was owed, and this went
Mm-hmm.
into administration, and they said, well, if you get to 8 stone, you can go home.
Mm.
I took that as a personal challenge. So I was having my breakfast, and then an hour later going down to the canteen to have a full English breakfast,
Right.
and then eating chocolate bars and sweets up until dinner time. Then an hour later, I go down for a second dinner.
Yeah.
Tea time, I'd have, theirs, and then a couple of hours later, I would order a 2-for-1 pizza, 12-inch pizzas. I'd
Yeah.
have one myself, and the nurses would share the other. And I did that.
Yeah,
It
you definitely seen it as a challenge. You're like, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get out of here.
took me 2 weeks to get from 6 stone 6 to 8 stone 3.
Wow. You were determined.
I was determined. I wanted to get out. I wanted to get back to the kids, and
Yeah.
yeah, it was a dark time. It was a really dark time. People would bring me in tins of spam.
Yeah.
There's nothing more glorious smelling than a hospital ward when the nurses are cooking spam for you in um, their rec room. It's quite
Right.
surreal. But I got out. I started to rebuild my life. I was baptized a few short weeks later,
Mm-hmm.
in my church, and as my now wife, as we walked in with kids, um, I, my partner tapped me on the shoulder. She went, "Isn't that your specialist?" And we were greeted by the man that had basically saved my life,
Yeah.
Dr. Orin Twentyman, his name is.
Wow.
And he was like, "Wow, it's so good to see you. Like, you look so well." As a
Yeah.
true walking stick, I had to learn to walk again
Yeah.
properly. He said, "We nearly lost you for a while." I said, "Yeah." I said, "What are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I'm here because my son is getting baptized right after you."
Wow.
Uh, and I took that as a sign from God.
Yeah.
Uh, the man that saved my life got to see me get baptized, and he got to see me change my life.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, I just started getting better and better and better. Wrote A Personal Apocalypse, and then wrote another book, the Streetlights book, finished that off.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was then asked to get involved in a film called The Souvenir
Mm-hmm.
as a consultant, and talk to the director, which was a Martin Scorsese funded film.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up working on those as an actor, and a consultant. I've worked in several TV programs. I've played everything from a serial killer to policemen to drug addicts to
Yeah.
anything that you can name. I have a healthy church life.
That's awesome.
I'm married.
Yeah.
I got married in 2019. And yeah, that's
Yeah. I
kind
mean,
of
you've been
where I am.
through quite a bit, and it's like you didn't just recover, you took off.
Yeah, I did. So during the second lockdown, 2021, I decided I was having some emotional difficulties. So I decided to start a podcast, and I spoke to a friend who's a hostage negotiator,
Hmm.
and we did this podcast together. And then that took off, and I begin season 4 in January.
Oh, wow,
I've
that's
interviewed
awesome.
everyone from bank robbers to drug addicts to stand-up comedians, television stars,
Wow.
Chesney Hawks.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
that's
I
incredible.
then started doing that. I wanted to give other people a voice, but I started losing mine.
Mm.
So I decided, I prayed, and I spoke to the team at church, and I decided that I was going to start speaking about some of these things that happen to help other people.
Yeah.
And I guess now sharing my voice.
Definitely. I know when we spoke originally, that was something we both related on was kind of that we've built a platform to the point that we've kind of lost our own voices. So it's nice to be able to guest or have, like in my case, my own episodes where we kind of come back to ourselves and have that. I know in the future I definitely want you on again because you have a lot to talk about. You have quite an extensive story, past, present, and I know you're still gonna do great things. But in wrapping up, is there any way that people can find your work, your books, all that?
Yeah, my website is jwgreg .wordpress.com, and everything that I do can be found there. All the interviews like this can be found on the front page in the blog.
Nice.
All of my podcast interviews can be found under the Live and on Drug tabs. My films can be found under the films tabs. It's all simply labeled.
Perfect.
I'm known as the Accidental Journalist on Facebook, facebook.com/JWGreg. You can find me there. I do a lot of lives. I'm going to be focusing on a lot more content in 2024, especially for men.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know we talked about that too. So
I want to lift men up, and I want to show men how to live an emotionally intelligent life.
yeah, I think it's very important. I know, like I said, we'd spoken on that, especially when it comes to men's mental health. It's very important. I'm very happy to hear that that's something you're going to be working on. But yeah, I just want to thank you again for coming on, being vulnerable with us, and sharing your story.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me.